following the principles we're talking about here, he would say, no, I only have enough money for one. I'm only going to buy one. So then he has to decide, is he going to buy the jelly beans that he originally wanted to get? He's going to get the chocolate bar. Is he going to get the lollipop? He's making a trade-off. He's making a decision between different things that he's going to spend his money on. Now, our spending is a little bit more weightier than his, because we may be trading off between something that we want and something that we need. And maybe it's not we need today, but maybe we need to set aside the money today so that we can buy it next month. It's something we need next month or need to pay for next month. And so we're going to budget, and that's going to help us with that. This person creates their spending plan calmly and carefully. It's not when they're in the store looking at the item. They're not deciding what their spending plan is then. Their spending plan is decided on in advance. When they're calm, they're careful about it. They've got everything laid out in front of them. They have time set aside for that. They're not, when you go to the store to buy something and then you see something and you're like, oh, I need that, I got to get that right now. No, it's a time set aside for thinking about your finances. And it is, okay, we'll talk about, that's the one side. And then the other side is what this other person might do. They're not going to consider their spending plan with their spouse. They're not going to know what their average expenses are. They're not going to know when their bills are due. They're not going to know what gets bumped. They're not going to think about the fact that they're not going to be able to pay this bill that they need to pay next month, because they're not thinking about that. They're thinking about what they want right now. And they're not doing it when they have time set aside. They're doing it when they're trying to get something else done. And they're not... So we have these two people and these two ways that we can work. We can either work where we're deciding on the fly, moment to moment, what our spending plan is, or we can determine our spending plan in advance. And that's what we need to do. So let's talk about a few budgeting myths here. Budgeting myth 1, only people in debt need a budget. No. If you're out of debt, you still need a budget. It will help you understand where your money should go and spend it wisely. And then the antithesis, only people out of debt need a budget. No, people in debt need a budget too. It helps them get out of debt, and then after they're out of debt, to stay out of debt, and they're on the other side of that. A budget limits my freedom. This is a big one, and you've probably heard people say, they go and say, can you go do this? And they say, I'm sorry, it's not in the budget. I can't do that. And it's almost like this budget is some cruel, impersonal taskmaster that's over top of them, is ready to beat them down, and that they're a slave to it. I can't do it because the budget says, I know what they're trying to do, perhaps, when they're talking to someone. They're trying to impersonalize the rejection, and say, well, it's not me saying no. I'd really love to do it, but, it's this inanimate object thing called a budget over here. But the problem with that is it turns our thinking, and it turns our thinking off of what it really is onto something that it's not. The right response is, and this doesn't sound good, but it's the right response is, we have other priorities right now. That isn't a priority. There's other things that are priorities right now that we need to do with our money. And maybe that's to pay off debts, or maybe that's just something else that's more important. A budget is your spending plan. It is your goals. It is the spending plan you and your spouse have created together and agreed on. It is the plan that you calmly created with information about past expenses, current expenses, future expenses, and desires all laid out in front of you. It is not a decision you make on the spur of the moment when you're tired, hungry, and ready to go home. You're not thinking about how much you need for the car insurance bill next month during those times, let alone how much you need to set aside to give money for your Christmas gifts or get out of debt. These aren't things you're thinking about during those times. A budget doesn't limit your freedom. A budget allows you to do things and allows you to see the choices that you're making in your spending plan. So another myth, you have to gather 12 months of receipts and enter them all. No, don't do this. Please don't do this. You don't have to go get 12 months of receipts. You don't have to enter them. I know I've read several different people saying how to build a budget, and they say, oh yeah, you need to go and pull out all the bills that you can and put them all in, stacks, and, then take them all and average. Oh, don't do that. A budget is a forward-looking tool. It's not a backward-looking tool. We're planning what we're going to do with our spending. Now, there will be a little bit of information that you might want to get if you say, well, I need to budget for my electric bill, but I haven't a clue what my electric bill is. Well, just go look at your last bill and start budgeting that, and then we'll adjust. We'll adjust over time. Transitions take a long time. Okay, building a budget. The first thing we're going to do to build a budget is we're going to create categories. These are the categories of things that we want to put our spending into. The first step to create categories, and I mentioned about people gathering all their bills and stuff and looking at that, and then you could create categories from that. Also, I have a list of categories here that I'm going to pass out in a little while on this worksheet, and I'm going to have some categories here for you. But before you look at my categories, before you, pull out your bills and things, I think you should take some time to brainstorm what your categories should be. Just sit down and say, and here's some things to, some lines that you can think along. Think about basic things. Things that you spend money on all the time. You should easily be able to come up with several of these. Well, I go to the grocery store. Well, yeah, okay. Well, you mentioned electric bill, yeah, and I have to have clothes. I buy clothes sometimes, and the rent or the mortgage. Common things like that are a good way to find some categories for your spending. Periodic things. Think about it in that way as far as bills that come up that sometimes are a surprise to you. They're not every month, but you're like, oh, I gotta put some money there. Things like car insurance, property taxes, vehicle registration, homeowners association due, or things like memberships, subscriptions, things that wouldn't necessarily be every month, aren't necessarily at the same time every year. Even if these don't surprise you, it's something that you can think along the think about periodic expenses that you might have. Things that you replace. Your car won't last forever. Neither will your refrigerator, your water heater, your air conditioner, various things in your house. They won't last forever. Now, we may not know how long they'll last. You may think, well, I think I can eke another, 5 years out of this. Okay. Well, if there is the possibility that you will need to replace it, then it should be somehow factored into the categories for your plan. You should have some sort of plan so when that bigger expense comes, you're not caught off guard by it and like, oh, I don't have any categories for this. I'm going to have to use my emergency fund. No, have some categories for those things. And you may not have a category that is, oh, I'm going to have a category for the refrigerator. No, you may not have a category that's that specific. You may have a large appliances category or something like that that's going to cover those things. Things that you do. think about your brainstorm along these lines. Do you like to take a vacation? If you do, you should probably have a vacation category. Do you give Christmas presents? You might want to consider a Christmas category. Think about those things that you do. Do you have particular events that you go to on a regular basis? Maybe every summer you go to these particular events. Well, if they cost money, then they might need to be a category and be factored into your spending plan. Things you want to understand. Maybe you're like, well, I know we spend money on food, but some of it's for restaurants and some of it's for groceries. Maybe you want to separate those and have two different categories for it. So you understand what are your needs in the groceries category and what are your wants or your things that you could live without if you had to in the restaurants category. Some other things you might want to know more about that you might not want to lump in with other funds are things like clothing, medical bills. There was a time when Angela and I considered separating printer ink into a separate category because we were spending so much money on printer ink. And then we found cheap Amazon ink and have never looked back on that. Okay, finally, think about your brainstorm in terms of dreams. Where do you want to be financially? Not just this year, not just next year. Where do you want to be? Where do you want to go? What are some things you would eventually like to do? Maybe you're thinking about furthering your education, and you're like, but that's such a big expense, and we don't have any money for that. Well, maybe you should create a category for that, and think about how can we get there. If that's your dream, if that's a goal that you might have in your life, then create a category for it. It's something we can save towards. Do you want to go on a missions trip someday? Might be a good thing to have a category for, so you can have that money set aside. And when pastor says, oh, we have this missions trip opportunity, just go. Just do it. Okay, so we've created a brainstorm, and hopefully you've created a list of categories, and you don't know for sure if you're going to keep all those categories. Just throw them all down. Throw down everything you can think of that you might possibly want to make a category, and then go through a process. And I put down split, merge, delete. You're going to look at some categories and you're going to be like, that's not specific enough. Maybe, for example, the groceries and restaurants one. Maybe you decide you want to split that. Maybe you go the other way and you decide, well, I want to combine those. I'm just going to have a food category and I'm going to combine those. Now on this sheet that I'm going to hand out, I have a bunch of categories. After you've completed the brainstorm, you're going to take this sheet and you're going to look at the categories I've listed. I listed everything I could possibly think of. Probably a lot of them will not apply to you, but some of them might. And there was a particular one that I didn't list in here on the brainstorm. Something else you should probably think about in the brainstorm is think about your hobbies. If you have a particular hobby that you put a lot of money toward, then you probably want to include that as a category. So when you get this sheet, and don't look at it until after you've completed your brainstorm, what you'll do is you'll take the categories that I've listed and you'll cross out all the ones that don't apply, that you don't want to have in your budget. And then I have blank spaces on here. You'll add the ones from your brainstorm that you're like, Lee didn't think about this, but I want this on my budget. Add those all. So when we're done, no two people or no two families should have a different, or every family should have a different looking budget. The categories will not be the same. And that's perfectly fine. This is going to be the basis for our initial spending plan that we make. It's going to be what you want it to be. And talked about splitting some things. Okay, if you're done with that process, you've crossed out, you've added, you're done with that process and done with this worksheet. If you have fewer than 12 categories, then either you've cut too much, you've cut out too many categories, or you're not living on your own, and so you're budgeting for like one thing. So if you have fewer than 12 categories, I think you should look back over it and think about it and probably split a few of those and have a few more categories. Now, I'm not against people having a lot of categories, but realize that if you have a lot of categories, while it will tell you more information about your spending, and that will help you, it will also take you more time to maintain and to fill out your budget. So, my recommendation is, if you're having trouble maintaining your budget with all the categories you've created, consolidate, merge some of those categories so that it's onto a level that you can maintain. I would rather you have a budget with fewer categories than not have a budget and have some sort of idea that you could have one with a lot of categories. If it helps you, Angela and I have 52 categories in our budget. But we are both detail people. We both like details and deal with details. So I don't expect you to have 52 categories in your budget. And if we have time, we'll talk about some of those categories. Okay, the next step, and it's on the back side of this worksheet that I'm going to give you. It's the accounts worksheet. And what I want you to do there is list the accounts that you have. What are you using what are you spending your money out of? Include the normal spending accounts. This is like your bank account and your credit card, maybe some short-term savings accounts that you might spend money out, every 6 months or so out of. Those are the accounts that I want you to include. Don't include long-term savings. We're not interested in that as far as the budget is concerned. If you're out of debt and you have some long-term savings, don't include that. Just let it live over there and grow and add to it. But we're not going to spend that money. We're just going to let it sit over there. So don't include it in our accounts list. So sum all your positive accounts. So if you have like a bank account and a savings account, you're going to sum those two things and you're going to get an amount. And then subtract your negative accounts that you will pay off when the bill comes. So if you have a credit card and you pay it off every month, then put the current balance there and subtract it from the positive amount that you have in your bank account. What this is going to do is it's going to give you a number, and that's the number that you need to initially budget. That's the number that you're going to need to divide up into your categories, and that's the number that's going to be used for, you're like, well, okay, some of that money I'm going to need because I need to buy groceries still this month. Yes, exactly. So you would look at that money and you would say, well, some of this is going to need to go in the groceries category, some of this is going to need to go in this category, and you're going to divide it up like that. So this is a one-time thing that you're going to do. The first time you set up your budget, you're going to have to allocate money that you already have. Most of the time when you're working with your budget, you'll be allocating money that's coming in. You got a paycheck, or maybe you earn interest on an account or something. You're going to take that money that's coming in and allocate it to your budget. So this is a one-time thing where we're allocating money from the bank account balance. And we'll talk about that more next week. We'll talk about how we can do that, or what means we're going to do to create the budget, to maintain the budget. As far as we're going to talk about some software and things. So your assignment, I'm going to hand out these sheets. Your assignment is to create your categories. Brainstorm. Do the brainstorm. Think about the different categories that you might need in your budget. Do the split, merge, delete process. Cross out entries I have in here, add your own entries so you can come up with your list of categories. And then on the back you'll select your accounts, and we talked about the steps that for that. Okay, so for the remainder of the class, we're going to talk about my categories. So these are the categories that Angela and I have in our budget. Again, disclaimer, they're not necessarily ones that you need in your budget. I'm just trying to help you think through categories and what things you need to think about when you're budgeting. So our first category is tithe. Take that off the top. God gets back what we have, what He has given us to manage. He gets back a portion of that first, and that's just automatic. Then we have an offering fund. Our offering fund is above and beyond our tithe. It's not part of our tithe. It's separate. But it's something that, it's like when we want to give to something, that's the category that we put it against. If we see someone and we say they need something, and I want to supply that need, well, then we take it out of the offering fund. So it's not necessarily to the church, but in fact, a lot of them are to the church. Pastor says we're having a special offering and we're going to collect money for this. Well, we say, well, let's do that. Let's give to that, and it comes out of our offering fund. And then when we talked about faith promise giving, we added a faith promise category because we didn't want that to be offering, and we didn't want it to be flexible like what offering is. In our offering fund, we put money every month toward our offering fund. We don't pay out every month from our offering fund. We don't have expenses every month from our offering fund. Some months we'll have a lot of expense from an offering fund if we give a lot that month, and some months we won't. But we wanted our faith promise to be more like our tithe fund, where it's automatic. We don't think about it. We just do it. We're going to trust God that He's going to supply the rest of our needs, and we're just going to give that to Him first. So then we have our basics. We have a groceries category, restaurants, households. We actually created a diapers category because we spend a lot on diapers. And we found it's a whole lot easier than hitting that, because you hit the households, and some months you may not buy, and we buy the big boxes that you can. And so some months you may not buy diapers, and so then other months you would, and it really it was putting a hit on our households category, which I didn't describe what a households category is. Our households category is stuff that we buy for the house at Walmart that isn't groceries. So, for example, if we buy laundry detergent or, soap or things like that, if you can't eat it and we buy it at Walmart and it's not expensive, it's not over $25, then it's probably a household item that we're going to include in that fund. The difficulty in that is whenever we get a Walmart bill, typically that has to go into two different categories. Part of it's going to go into groceries and part of it's going to go into households. And I've tried to get Angela several times. I'll be like, why can't we just combine those two categories? This is just it's a basics category. It's a regular, but it helps her. She says, no, that helps me. It helps me know because I know how much I'm spending on food. I know how much I'm spending on these other household categories, and it helps her. So we keep the category and we take the hit on that. So then we also have a gas category. Okay, housing. Our housing category includes our mortgage, our electricity, garbage and water, which under Oakland Park was together, but now it's split, but we still have it under the same category, and I think that's okay. Phone and internet, which is no longer phone and internet, it's now just internet because we dropped our home phone. Cell phone, we could have put that under our phone and internet. It would have made sense, and it might make sense for you to include it there. We separated it because we wanted to know how much we were spending on the cell phone, because the cell phone we can drop. It's an expense that can go away if it needs to go away. And so we wanted to track it separately. Home improvement. For that category, we have things like if we want to paint a wall, it's going to go under home improvement. We're going to put that expense under there, that sort of thing. House savings. So before we bought our house in Pensacola, we had a house savings so that we could buy a house. Then we bought a house, and we no longer have a house savings. And then we sold our house, and we had one again. And then we bought a house here, and we no longer had one again. Well, mostly. We didn't spend all our money to buy the house. We kept some money aside because we knew we were going to need to replace the roof eventually. And so now this house savings fund is really a roof fund, but it's still labeled house savings. Insurance, car insurance, life insurance for me, life insurance for Angela. You could put all sorts of insurances in there if you have them. Personal, medical, dental, optical, we wanted to separate those and know what we were spending for each of those. You wouldn't necessarily need to do that. You could have a medical and it could include your dental, optical too. Clothing, pictures. Angela was doing the J.C. Penney's, you do a, I don't know, $50 thing and you get free sitting fees, or I don't know the details. Anyway, it's some sort of picture related thing, and it was a periodic expense that we had, and every time we went and had that expense, we were like, well, where do we put it? It's not household, it's not groceries, it's not home improvement, it's, what is it? Well, we created a category for it, and so we just put a little bit of money in that category every month. We don't put a lot, just a little bit, and then when we have that expense, comes right out of that category, and we don't have to think about it. It's just there. It's funded, and we have the funds. We know we can go get those pictures, and we know we're not going to eat into any other category with that. We have a furniture category, a computer category, which I would like to be a new computer category, but it's more of a it's a printer ink category, buy a cable category. The miscellaneous things. Sometimes we put computer paper in there, but it's that sort of thing. Subscriptions. If you have a BJ's subscription or a Sam's Club subscription or a, we don't have those. We have a Sam's Club, but not a BJ's. If you have magazine subscriptions, those could go in there. Don't think we have. Oh yes, we do. We have an Answers in Genesis subscription that goes in there. Miscellaneous. We actually don't have a lot in our miscellaneous fund. I know some people put a lot in there, but you know by the number of categories we have that we itemize everything, and it's going to go somewhere. We're going to make it go somewhere. But we do occasionally have something that it's like, well, we really don't have any category for this, and so and we really don't want to shoot down the grocery budget this month by putting it in there, so we'll put it over here. And then charges interest, that's just a little tiny thing for if we get a little bit of interest on our bank account or we get a charge for making some financial transaction or whatever that'll go in there. Gifts. We have a gifts category, a Christmas gifts category, a wedding gifts category, and an other gifts. Other gifts is mostly birthday gifts. We could call it birthday gifts, but it's catch-all. Any other gift is going to come out of that category. Recreation. We have a vacation fund. Some people have an entertainment fund. Our entertainment fund is our vacation fund because that's what we do for entertainment mostly is we go on vacation. Then I have a fund and Angela has a fund. We put a little bit of money in those funds every month, and the idea is, Angela can use it for whatever she wants. I can use it for whatever I want in my fund, and we don't have to consult. We don't have to think about it. It's not. Well, why did you take that out of groceries, or why did you take that out of households? You shouldn't have done it. Well, just take it out of your own fund and don't worry about it. It's okay. We don't put a lot of money in there every month, and although it's you think of it as well, that's when I can go and, buy this little thing that I want. Well, we actually use it more for, those are actually our savings funds, and actually my computer fund is more in that fund than it is in the computer fund, is how it actually works out to be. Education. We have an education fund for me, for Angela, and for the kids. Mine is to maintain my certifications with Oracle. Angela's is to maintain her nursing license, and the kids is for their schooling. And so that's a big one for us, is the kids' education fund. Transportation, car savings, car repair, car registration. We split the car savings and car repair. We did have those as one category. Savings. We have an emergency savings. Ah, there it is, right there. Emergency savings. A lost job savings. Some people call this a 3 to 6 months income savings. That one's not fully funded for us yet, but we're working on it. Retirement. And then we have a category for each of our children, Luke, Emily, Josiah, and Timothy, and I'm going to have to create a new one soon. Proverbs 10:4. He becometh poor that dealeth with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich. So a budget is what helps us to be diligent with our finances and to not waste them, to have a goal, to set some goals, and so that we can reach those goals financially. And we'll talk more about the actual nitty-gritty of doing that next week. Let's close in prayer. Dear Lord, I do thank you for this opportunity to talk about finances and about how we should handle them and handle them according to your word. I pray that you would help us to do that. Help us this week as we seek to prepare a budget if we haven't. Help us to think clearly through the different categories that we should have and what should be important in the way of our finances and what shouldn't, Lord. And I pray that you would be with the service to come. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Lee. Did you budget your time? Is that what that is? Your time budget? Y'all look stunned. Everybody's just sitting here like, I can't believe this guy.